I'm Caitlin Morrison, and I submitted a project for Chapter 15 of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Chapter 15 is a pivotal chapter in this story. In it, the creature learns to read and is taught about the human condition by classics such as Paradise Lost. After learning to read, the creature is able to learn the story of his creation from Frankenstein's diary. Later in the chapter, the creature attempts to introduce himself to the family which he has watched and learned from and loved from afar. The encounter ends tragically, with the creature attacked and reviled, setting him down the path away from the highest ideals of human love and companionship toward the depths of violence and rage. I was inspired to create a soap representing the worlds and emotions that were opened up inside the creature when he learned to read. As with my Dracula project last year, I used this prompt as a chance to challenge myself with some new techniques. I wanted to create a book to embed in each bar to set the theme, and I wanted to make the embeds out of cold process soap instead of melt and pour. I planned to use my mold dividers, but knew that I would need to pour even thinner layers if possible. I set about crafting a temporary mold using cardstock and thin cardboard. Once the mold was set up, I mixed up a batch of soap and colored it. I poured the soap into condiment bottles so that I could pour in a more delicate and controlled manner. Overall, the improvised mold worked very well, although the containing mold bowed out a bit in the center, resulting in much thicker books than I wanted. I learned a fair amount about what worked and what didn't, and I'm pleased with this first attempt at making a tiny mold for book embeds. A couple of days after pouring, I unmolded the soap and began to shape each book embed. This took quite a while. Also, I had forgotten to first pour a bit of blue into the white center section to be the binding for half the books, and consequently had to practice a bit of soap molding technique using extra blue soap, which was soft enough to make up into the missing spines for the books. Finally, I let the books harden for a few days and came back to clean them up with cleanup tools. I considered painting the titles on with mica, but decided to leave them simple. I may experiment with that technique in the future. Once the book embeds were ready, I was ready to make the main batch of soap. This soap represents the creature learning about the concepts of God and Satan, the world, and the lofty sentiments and feelings he describes. The soap is about his learning of his creation and the contrasts between heaven and hell and between love and violence. I conceived of this soap as having different zones, representing hell, violence, fire on the bottom, earth and spring in the middle, and space, vision, imagination on top, finally overtopped by heavenly ideals, love, knowledge. For layer 1, hell, I wanted to call up the image of fires burning beneath, so I used flame colors, building up from blue to white to orange and to red, centered in a black landscape. Using thick soap batter, I began creating these layers from the bottom up. For layer 2, earth, I wanted to create a layer of brown representing the earth's crust. I used an in-the-pot swirl of blue and green to symbolize land and water. Above that, I poured a layer of blue into which I had mixed some white soap shavings, trying to create the feeling of clouds in a sky. For layer 3, space, I used a technique I had never tried before called the Clyde slide, involving pouring the soap in alternating pours down the side of a pail, and then pouring out of that pail. Unfortunately, I encountered some technical difficulties with filming, so I only have footage of the first part of this layer. For the fourth layer, heaven, knowledge, I piped in white soap in cloudy peaks. Finally, I placed each of the book embeds, trying to get them equally spaced. I lost track of my marks showing where to place the books, so I had to freehand a bit, which made the next step in the process a little harder. After letting the soap sit for a couple of days, I was able to unmold the soap loaf. Cutting the soap was challenging as I hadn't gotten the spacing of the books correct, so in the end I had to hand cut each bar, which means I ended up with some pretty uneven bars. I'm really happy with how the soap turned out, however. The design ended up much as I was envisioning, and I'm pleased with the story the bars tell. I really enjoyed crafting the tiny books out of soap, and I anticipate experimenting with this technique more. I hope you enjoyed watching this creative process. Thank you everyone for watching and supporting Cloverdale Performing Arts Center.